Hey everyone, welcome back to Miles on the Grid. This is season four, episode one. It's been a while since we've been here. I think we last spoke to each other back in December, but I'm very pleased to have Mr. David Noble, Ferrari's most easterly fan, join us for our first episode of the season. Um, I don't think there's much more I can say. You can see by his memorabilia that he lives and breathes Ferrari. So, David, thank you for coming on the show and welcome.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's right, ironic, really, that I'm not actually wearing a Ferrari top at the moment, but it's because it's cold and I don't actually have a Ferrari jumper that's clean.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know,
Yeah, that's
so for today, I'm wearing the sports car stuff. So
sports cars are still quite important to motorsport, arguably even more so than F1. But that's another whole other conversation.
that is, it may even play into this a little bit today, but we'll see.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, to sort of give a sort of brief intro about yourself, do you mind just telling my listeners a little bit more about who you are and what got you so interested in?
Yeah, no problem. Um, about me. I've been following Formula One for a long time.
Okay.
In more recent years, obviously progressing from there, you've got so about 8 years ago or so, I started getting more into like Formula One's expensive to go and see. So it was like, what else can you go and see?
Yes.
So I started going to more things like GT racing and stuff at like Snetterton, my local track, or Brands Hatch or Silverstone and stuff. And it's like between 2016 and 2019, we got to like do British GT, what was then Blancpain Series, and is now like the Fanatec GT World Challenge
Yeah.
and the World Endurance Championship, and getting to experience them races and wandering around the paddocks and stuff. And, so just expands the horizons a bit and seeing who you might meet or run into.
Yeah.
Um, so it, I started on doing YouTube videos and stuff because I was recording videos of like my son, who was like 3 or 4 at the time,
Oh yeah.
at these events and stuff. And it just ended up putting them all together and going from there. So, the channel itself will occasionally have videos at tracks and stuff. Very rare, unfortunately, these days, just because the hours I work and getting the opportunity to like sit down and talk racing, kind of like we are now.
Yes.
But so yeah, just enjoying all forms of racing and just trying to see it when I can.
Awesome. I mean, I guess, and apologies if I'm shouting, my mic is busted, so I'm having to raise my voice a bit. But I guess the question that I have first off the bat is, what is your most favorite type of racing? Is it GT? Is it sports cars? Is it F1? Is it bikes even, for example?
It's still Formula One. The thing is, that was the first thing I started watching. That was sort of led to the everything else.
Yes.
So, if I'm at work or something, people see me, they're asking me, so what happened in the Formula One? They're not asking me what happened in, GT racing.
Yeah.
So it's the easiest one to have a conversation with people about. I love the other series and stuff, but I got into them through Formula One. Um, Junior formulas and stuff as well. When you go into certain things, like when we went to Blancpain, for example, they used to have Formula Renault in support of that, and some of the drivers that we saw wandering around the paddock there, it was like, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri.
Yeah.
So, we were very lucky during that period in terms of getting autographs and stuff. It's a lot harder now, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Right. Okay, cool. So I mean, sort of pushing away from let's say like any other form of racing, since we're talking all things F1, I'm guessing that you've watched the first race of the season. Bahrain was, I don't know if you
yeah.
call it a race that you could watch, given that there was utter domination at one end and then a few midfield fights and then
Well, from third back, it was fascinating.
yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
If you ignore like the first two, then the Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston Martin stuff was intriguing.
Yes.
It's just like Ferrari, we broke down.
Okay.
Uh, we had no tires.
Again.
Um, Mercedes are reliable. Uh, an Aston. Okay, well, there's another team that's fighting for podiums and potential. If Red Bull drop the ball, you could see Fernando winning again,
Yeah,
based on this evidence.
yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot to talk about, just not possibly for the lead.
Mm. I think that's an interesting one for this year because I've seen a lot of gossip online of people saying, "Oh my gosh, domination's boring," and you know we don't want another Mercedes from 2014 onwards to 2021 taking place. But put that to the side because that always happens in any form of racing, in particular with F1. You had Williams doing it, you had McLaren, you had um, Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, of course, over
Mm.
multiple stretches of time. So for me, that's part and parcel. But I think one thing that I just wanted to touch on was Aston Martin. Where has that come from? I know that they've done a massive recruitment drive. You know, you've had them bring in, let's say, a Spec B car to Barcelona last year, which
Yeah,
started with a green Red Bull, although it didn't perform like a Red Bull. And now you've got
yeah.
comments from Helmut Marko, Christian Horner, even Sergio Perez making slight jabs and, dare I say, callous jokes for now until Aston Martin becomes a proper contender to Red Bull, saying, hey, it's a green Red Bull. And you have this.
Well, the thing is, you can only nick so many staff from someone's design department before your car starts looking a bit like theirs.
True.
So, Aston Martin have been doing their fair share of poaching. So it's no
Yeah.
surprise that the car starts to look similar to where they came from.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the ingredients have been in place for a couple of years. It's just they got a lot of new people in. And when you get a lot of new people in, obviously it ends up with a bit of instability as everyone's finding their feet and finding their position in the team.
Yes.
But there's no excuses for them now
Mm.
because Lawrence Stroll has thrown a lot of money at them. They've got all these new staff in, they've got as much budget as almost anyone else on the grid to play with. They've got a new factory coming in May. They're not the small team they used to be anymore.
Mm.
So it's not a surprise to see them contending. But
Okay.
obviously, what Mercedes won't like is that a customer team has now got an edge on them. So, as a side story, it'll be interesting and fascinating to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Mercedes will edge them in the end just because they've got more experience at fighting at that sort of level and stuff. And stronger driver lineup. I mean, nothing against Lance, but he's not George Russell.
That all
So,
fellow Lance Stroll supporter here, so I might. Well, I won't disagree with you on the fact he's not George Russell. He doesn't have the pedigree, doesn't have the defensive ability, or
mm,
I've got to be careful. I want to get invited to Aston Martin. He doesn't have the awareness of a George Russell or a Fernando Alonso.
mm.
However, I think in the right conditions, he is
On his day,
absolutely
he's great. Don't get me wrong. It's just that the day
fair.
historically hasn't come along often enough.
Fair, fair. I
But
agree.
he's decent. He's. You could make the pay driver jabs or whatever else when he first turned up in the sport because he should have spent longer in the junior formulas. But this point in his career, he's got decent amount of experience.
Yeah.
You know, if he keeps his wheels and stuff clear, he can normally go forward. So it'll be interesting to see how he does in a car that can actually compete.
Mm. I agree. I think it's going to be. I don't want to say it's going to be like his F4 season. I think that he did well and had enough super license points or enough
Definitely.
F3 season and then won enough races, caught the attention of a couple of extra sponsors, and Mr. Stroll himself was like, you know what, I'm going to put you in a car regardless of what anyone wants to do, coming at the same level as Max.
Well, the the thing with Lance Stroll is that when he's got his dad's money behind him, he can do whatever he likes.
He can. I
I
mean,
mean, to put it in perspective, he done well in the junior formulas because he had a lot of money put with him to be in the best team, to have good driver coaches with him. In F3, he ended up with Prema his first year there, showed flashes of speed, crashed too often.
mm,
In his second year, on paper, it looks like he ran away with the championship, but some of that was that his teammate, his name escapes me at the minute, basically was kind of mentoring him and kind of letting him go off into the distance a bit while he played rear gunner, because basically his teammate had run out of budget, and the only way he could compete in F3 that year was to help Lance out.
Yeah.
And then obviously by that point in time, Lawrence was sticking a lot of money into Williams, so he was also getting a lot of simulator time and whatever else there. So yeah, he couldn't have got there without help. But there's plenty of other drivers who have had a lot of money behind them and haven't managed to get the super license points and haven't won the stuff even with all the help. So it's like, well, he's had help, and there's certainly a lot of drivers who perhaps have been better who haven't had as much help. So that's why he beat them. He did it. So you can argue about the fairness of it as much as you like, because an advantage is an advantage. But he still had to drive the car, and he managed to do that.
Yes. You can only beat what's in front of you, and you can only deal with the cards you're dealt, I guess, from that perspective.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest with it. No person who ever had an advantage over someone said, no, I don't want it.
No, of course. Of course, you'd be I don't want to say a fool, but you'd be an idiot not to sort of grasp whatever's in front of you. And I think that sort of plays back to Aston Martin and what we were talking about, because I think Aston Martin, like you mentioned, have now got an opportunity where they've got, on paper, arguably the second quickest car, depending upon the circuit or depending upon the conditions. They have one of the best drivers in history, regardless of my personal opinion on him. He's rapid and he's a brilliant racer.
Well, the thing is, Nando's a force of nature. I mean, at 41, there's not many other drivers who could or would have the sheer sort of hunger and want that he has got to try and be successful.
Yeah.
You can argue at all costs almost, but in terms of wheel-to-wheel racing, he's quite a clean racer. It's just the off-track stuff which has sort of made him, given him the kind of reputation he's got. Which is unfortunate, because we'd like to remember him for being this fantastic racing driver, who's done all these things. But yeah, he has a reputation.
Yeah, it's not the best, but I think as a complete driver, he might be the. This is going to hurt me saying it, and it's going to hurt a lot of my my listeners. As a complete driver or racer, he might be the best in F1. Having crossed over from series to series, brought every part of his skill base from Indy, he hasn't done work, but Indy, Dakar, back to F1.
He has done work. He's a world champion in work, and he's won Le Mans with him.
Remind me what year he did work, because my brain's failing me at 9 p.m.
Alonso, he was one of the Toyota team.
20...
He replaced Anthony Davidson in number 7, I think it was.
2018 or 19, wasn't it?
It was around that time.
Yeah, apologies. I'm tired. But no, so he's brought a vast skill set back into F1, and for me, he might be the most complete driver on the grid. That's not to say that he's my favorite. That's not to say that he's the quickest. But in terms of his all-round skill set right now, I think he could.
Yeah. I think some of what it's done for him is that being in WEC, where you're sharing a car with 2 other drivers, you've got to be working together with them to benefit the team, to push the team forward. You can't be as selfish as you can be perhaps in Formula One. And I think, he done a number on bloody Alpine last year. But when you're seeing him trying to work with it, working with the team and talking to them and whatever else, if he's getting the feeling they're working back with him, and especially like the first race of Aston Martin, seeing the way he was with Lance, for example, that's very different to like the Alonso you got of old, almost, or the impression you got of him. It's one of these weird things with Fernando. Whenever you listen to his teammates talking about him, for the most part, they seem to get on with him really well. When you're talking the likes of Felipe Massa and Carlos Fisichella, bearing in mind some of the moves he put on Massa when they first became teammates together or whatever, sort of putting him in his place.
Yeah.
Sort of how well they seem to get on with each other now. It's sort of like if you kind of accept that Alonso is better than you and just get on with it, then you can get on really well with him. Seems to be like the deal almost. So it's interesting to see what the relationship's going to be like at Aston going forward, because I can admit Lance Lance and Fernando have known each other 10 odd years back from when Lance was a Ferrari junior.
Okay.
Um, but so, he has a relationship with them already. He's known obviously Lawrence for a long
Mm,
time, but
yeah.
knowing someone when their kid is like someone who wants to be you one day, and knowing someone when they're your team boss and you're
Yeah.
both very strong-minded individuals,
Mm.
if stuff starts going wrong at Aston Martin, I can see that being quite fiery kind of relationship.
Did you see the audio from when Lance hit him? I think it was either turn two or turn four, and he kept on
Uh,
Gonzo kept on asking the garage like, who hit me? And they kept on saying, oh, we're checking, we're not too sure, we're checking.
yeah.
And he never got a clear cut answer. Obviously, they're not going to dish out and say, oh my gosh, it was Lance, because who knows what's going to come on the radio.
Well, the thing is, when Alonso looks at that back, it was just the case of Lance was making a move on George, and Alonso was taking a very different angle in, and
Yeah,
it was just a racing incident, just one of them things.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't think I don't think Fernando could be too upset with him for what happened, basically.
No, I don't think so. But I did wonder in the heat of the moment. I was like, what is going to happen now? What's going to come out of your mouth out of pure? I don't say like as a pure response. What's the first thing that you're going to say if you hear it's Alonso's it's
Mhm.
Alonso's car that hit you? But I think that begs for an interesting season, especially if they do continue to remain quite closely matched. If they, I
Mm.
doubt it because I do think that Fernando will streak ahead of Lance at most tracks. But let's see what happens.
The thing is, I mean, fair credit to Lance considering he finished ahead of George. Bearing in mind he was 2 weeks before in a accident where he's now got pins and stuff in his hand.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, obviously he is like the best medical people available to him that money can buy and
yeah,
stuff, and he even sort of said, give credit to them because they're the people who made it happen for him to be able to do it. And when you're looking at the trouble he had getting in and out of the cars and stuff,
mm,
and with having to be careful driving the wheel in practice, there's a very grey area about whether he perhaps should have been in the car in the first place.
yeah,
Because while he might have been able to drive it well enough so that he wasn't a risk to anyone else, if he had had an accident and his hands had got injured again,
yeah,
like
yeah.
hit the wall hard and the wheel had spun round, would that have hurt him or injured him even more?
But it's such a grey area, and I saw two sides
Mm.
of the debate on Twitter and on Instagram. There was someone quite well known who was saying, that there's a lot of um, Twitter doctors and such. But I do agree with you. I think at the end of the day, look at Grosjean's accident a couple of years ago. If Lance wasn't
Yeah.
able to take himself out of the car, that could have posed a risk for him, as well as for medical staff, as well as anyone else that was trying to get involved in that scenario.
I
Yeah,
mean, that Grosjean incident was at Bahrain as well.
I, I think sometimes we forget that F1 and motorsport in general is actually dangerous. Like
Mm.
we see it on TV, we go to the races. It's oh my gosh, this is a nice spectacle, but it's a dangerous profession. This isn't
Uh,
something lightly.
I mean, the thing is, if you look at last year, there's two incidents that really bring it to mind. I mean, obviously, everyone remembers Guan Yu Zhou's incident at Silverstone, how the hell he walked out of that, especially with the roll hoop collapsing. It's like visually, that was like madness. But the one that really scared me, to be honest with you, was Austria, Carlos Sainz of his engine fire,
Oh yeah,
because he could not get out of that car because
mm,
every time he tried, he rolled backwards.
yeah.
Now, the thing is, if he had managed to get out and it had rolled backwards, you'd have had a flaming car rolling onto a live track. I mean, I would not like to have been Carlos in that situation.
I mean, just thinking about it does bring a bit of a shiver, and I do
Mm.
think that going forward, I know everyone says we want to see either more overtakes or less overtakes, depending upon which side of the fence you stand. And we want to see real racing. So with removing tire blankets, I believe it's from. I'm not going to say that because I'm tired and I'm trying to rack my brain as to whether it's from next year or 2026. But we're removing tire blankets soon in order to have a more IndyCar style approach to
Uh, the
race.
official reason for it, of course, is that's a lot of weight and a lot of stuff that you're dragging around to circuits. So if you can like say, do we really need it?
Mm.
You're saving then a lot of money, both in terms of financial and in terms of like fuel costs and stuff. Because F1, of course, is really desperate to try and like reduce like its impact on the environment and try and show and justify that, we're not having this massive impact. Um, and obviously not hauling around 20 cars and however many sets of tires worth of tire blankets kind of saves on that. It's a bit like Haas with its three-seater pit box.
I mean, I can feel we're going down a tangent, but that was interesting to see because I thought, one, is it a sort of play on Haas's resources in the sense of, hey, we're so cash strapped, although we've got funding by Gene, we are going to try and be as effortless and as frictionless as possible. But at the same time, it does bring an element of how can we reduce the amount of freight that we're carrying? How is it we can become more sustainable in the search for a greener sport, if you could say that, despite not being
It's
Formula.
left field thinking, and you want to see ideas of innovation and how that they can improve things like that. I mean, how much it will compromise them, sort of in terms of like the running of the car on race events and like the ability to like look across a pit box to each other and communicate. I don't know, but we're not living technology in terms of technology in the same way we were during the 1980s, where they've got like it's just a switch on a radio where you can then talk to the person like in the garage and stuff, rather than having to look across or run back to them or what have you. So yeah, if they've got their sort of systems all set up in place and they've practiced and they know, okay, well, to do this, we're going to speak to that guy who would have been there. I'm just going to flick it to that radio thing and then I can talk to them.
Yes.
Then if their processes and whatever else are well worked out, they should be fine.
Well, on the topic of process, I think Haas will be fine. On the other hand, I don't know if our team Ferrari is going to do as well. There have been a couple of reports coming out in Italian media over the last couple of days. Big one was with Gazette, and then there was a different publication which was talking about how there's changes going on at Ferrari. Fred Vasseur has either cracked the whip or people have chosen to take a leave of absence before.
Well, I was having a look at it earlier today, and you got David Sanchez, who was the head of aerodynamics, who's left. One article one article today I saw said that Lauren Mekis is possibly leaving, which is a bit alarming. And another article was saying that Fred has had a falling out with Benedito Vigna, who's the managing director, because basically Fred has less power over the team in terms of other things than the other 9 people in his position in the team management. Because this other guy basically has like terms of passes and stuff for sponsors and all the rest of it. And he took that power from Bonotto last year. Now, you could argue with Bonotto's case, he was overworked because he was trying to keep an eye on the technical side stuff as well. And being an engineer, I don't think he was ever the guy to be in charge of like the more political or sponsor side of the team anyway. But Fred Vasseur, that's kind of what he does. So for him to come into this position and be like, I don't know, you would hope that Ferrari play to his strengths rather than going, well, we've been doing it like this, so we're going to keep on doing it like this. It's like you employed the guy, you need to let him do what he does.
No, absolutely.
We'll see. But at the moment, it's looking a bit shaky.
I mean, it's scary. We are a week away from the second race of the season, and regardless, because I think they changed a member of their strategy team. Someone got promoted last week or the week before the first race.
Yeah.
Now you're missing up to 3 key members of your infrastructure. John Alcon is having chats with Charles Leclerc in private, with Charles sort of conveying his frustrations or even his concerns about the growth and trajectory of the team. You then have, like you mentioned, Mr. Vigna being in charge of everything, either commercial and operationally. And Fred's sort of there like, well, what am I here for? Am I just a team manager as opposed to a team principal? Why don't I even have the same responsibilities as a new TP, such as James Vowles, for example?
Well, the thing is, it's interesting to know what he was sold the job as being when they spoke to him about it,
yeah,
because where he came from, he was like the head of the Sauber group, which is an infinitely more involving job than the one he's currently finding himself in twiddling his thumbs, seemingly from the look of it.
yes,
Um, Part of the problem as well comes down to the car itself was developed last year based on last year's concepts by Mattea. So it's like it doesn't have it doesn't have Frederick's um, fingerprints on it or whatever anywhere. So he's having to deal with what we now know is a not as good a car as we could have done with, that suffers from the same problems as last year's car had and is further away from Red Bull than it was even then. And not finding himself in like the other positions and stuff to, do what he wants to do. I think he was hoping for more when he signed that contract.
I would believe so. Like you mentioned, it's Matteo's DNA all over this year's car. I do want to. I don't want to rush ahead to 2024 because by all means it seems like it still will be an interesting season. But I would be very curious to see the differences between this year's iteration of the concepts and then next year's iteration, but also the change in terms of how Ferrari actually approach strategy, for example, what their reliability looks like towards the end of the year once the aggregated wind tunnel time sort of changes. If there's any,
The strategy was an interesting one actually,
yeah,
because what they didn't, every race last year it was like, okay, what's the point in the race when it's going to get it wrong today?
yeah,
And this weekend, it was like, last year, damn well that Charles would have gone for that glory run on that set of tyres in quali to try and nick pole.
yeah,
This year they're like thinking, well, actually, that might not benefit us to do that. We need the races where the points are scored. Um, so that you can actually see thought almost, over the winter, they got the quickest pit stop time in the race, and it's like, there's if you look hard enough, there's things you can take as positives.
yeah,
Um, we're looking hard, uh, but there's there was stuff that came out of it. You know, if you just look at like the wiki page, one retirement, one fourth place, it doesn't look so good. If you look at the gaps between Ferrari and Red Bull, it doesn't look so good. This year was always, I hesitate to say it was going to be another one of them years of trying to like get reorganized, put stuff together, but it was always in danger of being that, just because of people coming in, people leaving, you know,
yeah,
and the issues we had from last year. Have we solved them? Well, apparently not. But in terms of, yeah, because while I was talking about positives, I was reminded of, Laura Mecky's potentially being asked to leave, and the whole reason for the issues with Charles was because of the battery
yeah,
thing,
yeah,
which obviously got swapped out and then broke down anyway.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when you're a Ferrari fan, when it rains, it pours. I think that's the best quote for it.
I think what I said, I mean, I've said many things, one of which is it's never boring being a Ferrari fan. And another one was, when someone said, may you live in interesting times, they were talking to a Ferrari fan. It's never dull.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, I guess moving on to a slightly more positive view of Ferrari, who would you say has made the biggest impression on you as a Ferrari fan over the years? It could be anyone.
Uh, well, ironically, it's like part of the reason I liked Ferrari, to be honest with you, was like growing up in the 80s. I started watching it in the mid 80s. I mean, I sort of don't remember too much of the earlier races and stuff I watched, to be honest.
Yeah,
But it was like all he ever saw was like Williams and McLaren just winning and dominating between them. If it wasn't one, they'd win for a couple of years, and then the other one would win for a couple of years. And it was nice when someone else won.
yeah,
So ironically, I started liking Ferrari because they were the red car that occasionally it went right for.
yeah.
But the problem is, I do also remember them as being the red car that broke down an awful lot and had tyres fall off in the pit lane occasionally. But, they were red and they were bright and they were flamboyant. Whereas I always felt with the English teams, wrongly as it turned out, that they were just a bit cold and clinical. I think if I'd have known more about Williams at the time, I wouldn't have thought that because obviously everything that happened with Frank and what have you,
Yes.
um, there was a lot more sort of heart and feel to the team than I understood when I was like 9 or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, the internet now gives us so more, and films and stuff now gives us so much more access to learning about things and what have you. It's like I didn't know in the mid 80s about Bruce McLaren and everything like that. So, but you learn.
I mean,
But yeah, I mean, and then it was like a coming together of things because Michael Schumacher turned up on the scene in the middle of 1991, and who's this young kid who's taking it to all these established names. I
yeah.
suppose it's a little bit like how people felt when Lewis came into the sport, how people felt about Max when he came into the sport. Whether you like him or not,
Yeah.
he is a amazing driver. You know, you, there's certain drivers you look at them and like they're going to have an effect on you.
Mm.
For me, that was Michael. For other people, that was Ayrton Senna.
Yeah.
As I said, Lewis, Max, Fernando being another one. They're just drivers who you looked at and you knew they were going to do something. Um, and then, of course, Michael ended up at Ferrari. So it's like the two things meeting in the middle. So, and then you learn more about the sport and the history of it and what have you. And obviously, in terms of Formula One, there's no team with a bigger history. And Mercedes can trace it back longer, but not consistently in terms of Grand Prix racing. Um, and obviously, the stories about Enzo, and then you've got drivers like Gilles Villeneuve, and so there's a lot there.
What would you say is your most recent favorite Ferrari memory, if you have one?
Oh, good question. In terms of actual Grand Prix, I mean, I like Charles Leclerc.
Yes.
I mean, I've followed his career since like Formula 3. In 2016, we were lucky enough to go to, can never afford to go to the Grand Prix properly, but in 2016, we went to the F1 testing at Silverstone
Oh, nice.
and managed to get into like the pit lane because I'm a card carrying member of like the Scuderia Ferrari Club. Um, and just for like 15 minutes at a time, we managed to get into the pit lane. And I was just lucky enough to be in there with the camera when like Charles Leclerc came in to box the car and then go back out again and stuff. And we did the Kimmy as well. So I've got some cool pictures of that. But they'd packed up one of the hospitality things and left the other one there.
Okay.
And first, I said, the 15 minutes we were allowed to be there, I managed to get into that. I'm sitting there, and Charles Leclerc comes in, grabs like something from like where the coffee bit is, and just grabs straight back out again. I'm like, I missed him.
Yeah.
Never mind. But yeah, it was when he was like in GP3, I think, at the time. But yeah. So I'm well happy with my picture of him in a 2016 Ferrari coming into the pit box. It's awesome. I mean, from a personal point of view, obviously that was great. We managed to get his autograph and a picture of him, me and my son in his buggy back in like 2018, 2017. Yeah, 2017, I think, when he was in GP2,
Okay.
F2 as it was then.
Yeah.
Get the money right eventually. um, and yeah, couple of years ago, for Christmas, my wife bought me this half scale Charles Leclerc helmet.
Oh, nice.
And I've been like pestering, it's like Autosport. I'd love to go to Autosport.
Yeah.
So she bit the bullet and bought me tickets for that as well. And a week after she'd bought me the ticket for it, Charles Leclerc got announced as being there on the day I was going.
Epic.
Fantastic.
That is epic.
Yeah, so I've managed. I'm like there with my bag, like near the front, and he's come down the sign and stuff, and I've got like trying to juggle my phone and like this picture of us from when we'd met him in F2 and like this half scale mini helmet.
Yeah.
And managed to get them signed,
Well,
which is
nice.
awesome.
That's
So
awesome. Yeah.
yeah, that was great. So sort of personal stuff there, as in like memories of like Ferrari stuff and Shell stuff, what have you. Um, I mean, the weirdest one for me, which I loved, um, not strictly speaking Formula One, but in 2019, we managed to get, because the Ferrari club thing, I mean, the last year World Endurance Championship was at Silverstone.
Yes.
My hair's a mess.
All right.
Um, it was like bucketing it down with rain. You had a barrier. We were in the paddock area at the World Endurance Championship on the Friday. It was bucketing it down with rain. One of the barriers fell over onto one of the cars that was parked in
Oh,
Parc
wow.
Ferme. And we're sitting across from this in AF Corsa, which was like the team that ran the works Ferrari GT cars. And we're sitting in there, and they've got the European Le Mans Series race, I think it was, on one screen. They've got the Formula One qualifying on another screen. And I'm sitting within 10 feet of about three of their GT drivers, including Giancarlo Fisichella.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
watching this, it's like, yeah, this is very cool. We should do this more often. So naturally, they've not been back to Silverstone since.
Fair. I mean, it's the best memories that you always want to to keep as your
Yeah,
last ones. Just because
that's
I know that time is against us and we've got about maybe 20 seconds, is there anything that you'd want to say to my listeners so that they could follow your channel or follow you on socials?
um, I say the channel's been a bit quiet recently, unfortunately, but it is DJ and Racing Fan on YouTube. I say at the moment it's been mostly days out and stuff that I've done vlogs for. I'm obviously planning on doing a few more sort of in the house videos, but it's time has not been my friend in the past few months. Some of it's to do with work and the hours of work. But if anyone would like to watch the channel anyway, that is where it is on YouTube.